Thank you.
10 minutes.
Yes, Kieran Corley. And I know the normal parliamentary niceties don't usually extend to colleagues commenting on where the debate is at and how long people have spoken for, but it is somewhat striking, if not nauseating, to recall that at the order of business this morning we had several war dances over on the other side of the chamber in relation to the amount of time that was being afforded to this debate, that it wasn't long enough, that it was being all wrapped up today, that it was being rammed through and so on. Quite a few of the speakers that were down to speak on the other side of the chamber this afternoon fell far short of the time that was allocated to them. Now, they're entitled to do that. I don't know, Kieran Corley, whether I'll get through 10 minutes. I may, or I may be hoping that I'd have had longer. But it is a bit hard to take, as Deputy Lyons talks about a requirement of honesty and basic straightforwardness, and maybe it is too much to look for, that when people actually come in at the order of business looking for extended time for debate, it's a bit hard to take them when in fact that opportunity is not taken up. And when I noticed that Deputy Doherty made a very substantial contribution earlier on, and Deputy Tobin came in a few minutes ago and got up for 5 minutes and said basically what Deputy Doherty had said and went off about his business. It's just simply not credible for Deputy MacDonald to come in, as I say, and engage in this song and dance about. It's just not honest. Okay, people may think, oh, the public won't notice and they won't notice. People do notice things like that. They do notice things. And it's a requirement, as Deputy Lyons says, of honesty and fair play. And that's not happening in this debate. And in fact, that is precisely what happened. That dishonesty was at the heart of the No campaign, it seems to me, right throughout the 4 weeks. It was littered with misrepresentations. I mean, there's always a margin of appreciation, Kieran Corley, in relation to political debate. A particular set of events can be interpreted different ways by people with different political perspectives. That's understood. We live in a democracy. Well, I can say that it means that a certain course of events will ensue, and someone can say that that's not the case, that he or she thinks something else will happen. But there are certain facts in most debates, like, for example, what treaties actually say on the face of them. And time and time again in the last 4 weeks, Sinn Féin made claims for the particular in relation to Stability Treaty, in relation to what it contained or didn't contain, in the teeth of what it actually reads. In the teeth of what it actually says, for example, in relation to issues like conditionality. They told the Irish people that the fiscal rules were being placed into the Constitution at one stage, the No campaign, the No side did. They're not. They told the Irish people that the European Court of Justice, Sinn Féin did this over and over again, that the European Court of Justice could fine countries for failing to keep to the rules. Not true. The European Court of Justice does have a role in relation to supervising the transposition of the rules, but not the compliance with the rules. Now, these may sound like technical kind of issues that maybe most people aren't interested in, but these were misrepresentations of the truth by Sinn Féin. Now, I can understand and accept that we can have different perspectives, but I do not accept, and will never accept, a misrepresentation and a straightforward lie to the Irish people in relation to what was put before them. And it deepens that it seems to me that it calls into question the credibility of any political party if that's the trade that they engage in. That on the very first day of their campaign, they cheerfully misquote, willfully misquote 3 people, 3 professional economists. I never heard a word of apology about that. Just to lift half of what they were saying and put it up as an argument to vote no. Like, as I say, Kieran Corley, by all means there's a margin of appreciation in relation to what we could argue about. And I've often argued with Deputy Doherty in relation to these matters. But to misrepresent people is fundamentally intellectual dishonesty. And it crosses the line for any political party to seek to do that and to actually do it and to try to get away with it. Thankfully, they didn't. And it reduces their credibility. It certainly reduces their credibility in my eyes. As someone who, in this House, who perhaps was more willing to listen to and engage with Sinn Féin representatives perhaps than others, perhaps understandably so, given other people's experiences in the past with Sinn Féin. I'm certainly open to Sinn Féin and open to all political parties and members of this House coming in to engage in free and honest debate. But what they did the last 4 weeks was anything but honest. It was dishonest, profoundly dishonest, and has changed my perspective and my view on their willingness and ability and preparedness to engage honestly in the debate. It colours my view of them, and I believe ultimately in time it will colour the views of the Irish people in relation to that organisation and that party. There's no question in relation to that in my mind. This bill that Minister has introduced in the House. What's the role of any parliamentarian, whether he or she is a government parliamentarian or an opposition parliamentarian, presented with a bill brought in by the government, is to look at that bill, to read it, one hopes, and to assess it and to say, is this in the interests of the people that elected us to this House? Is it in the interests of the people who put us here? And no argument that I've heard today suggests to me for one moment that the making available of a funding backup, which may or may not be required by Ireland, hopefully it won't, but may be required by Ireland at some point, that the putting in place of that fund, how could that run against the interests of the Irish people? By making available by the member, in the Eurozone of such a fund. Quibble about aspects of it. I agree with the government's view in their support for the position I think has been articulated by the new French finance minister in recent days and by others, that the fund ought to be in a position to give direct support and direct funding support to banks in circumstances which presumably would be circumscribed. I think that that is something that ought to be worked towards and ought to be done. But I do not say, as Sinn Féin appear to do, that in the absence of that being done now, I mean, what's really happening here, Laskin Curl, the Sinn Féin position is this. We'll agree yesterday with the amendment to the treaties in Article 136. That's fine, you can do that. We'll agree in principle with the idea of an emergency fund, but we want 5 different things done to change it. Like, talk about foraging around to try and find a reason to oppose it. Talk about, again, an example of dishonesty. Well, we know how we want to vote at the end of it, so how do we get there? How do we get to a position where we can half-credibly say to the Irish people that there's a reason to vote against us? It is just devoid of credibility and devoid of reality. And again, I say, devoid of honesty. Absolutely dishonest. Let's pick a few things here. Like, we think there should be an emergency fund, but it should be the following 5 things. And they all, as well, Laskin Curl, they always sort of come across with these proposals like direct funding and banks and so on, as if they thought them up themselves. You ever notice that with Sinn Féin? You listen to their speeches. Sinn Féin are always arguing for this. Sinn Féin proposed this. Sinn Féin, as if they suddenly thought up all of these things. As if the minister and the government hadn't been arguing and pressing and pushing every waking hour that they have for concession. Well, you have no idea, Deputy O'Brien, what's going on, and you've actually rendered yourself, irrelevant. You have rendered yourself irrelevant by the actions of your party in the last 4 weeks, in circumstances where you are no longer, it seems to me, if you ever were, a party that was willing to engage in honest debate with other colleagues and other parliamentarians in here. You crossed a line in recent weeks, which I noticed, and which won't be forgotten easily by quite a lot of people, because if you want to actually engage, as I said, in an honest way in politics, you will have to stop telling lies to the Irish people. And that is something that you appear incapable of doing, fundamentally incapable of doing.
2 minutes left, Deputy. 2 minutes.
We listen to lectures from your side all the time, and normally we don't interrupt. Mind you, I don't mind being interrupted. If I was interrupted in some way that it was an issue that required to be responded to, well, then I would.
Deputy White has the floor.
What's the answer?
2 minutes.
What's the answer to the availability? What's the alternative to the availability of this funding? We know what it is from the MLA, default. The Deputy Boyd-Barrett is very clear about that. Default. Don't pay, walk away, leave it. Okay. Well, we know what sort of credibility that contains. The Sinn Féin position, why don't they say default? Because that really is what they mean. Because what they say is, see, they say we argue for a write-down. Just notice the language. Sinn Féin argues for a write-down. So they never tell you what happens if we don't obtain the write-down that they argue for. So is it that they would just continue arguing for it? Or are they what would they do if that doesn't, in fact, if that doesn't emerge? They'll throw in burn a few bondholders. We'll burn a bondholder or two. Really, in truth, Laskin Curl, their position is to default, is to call for a default, it seems to me. And, you know, at least the MLA have the honesty to say that. Or ULA, whatever it is. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I don't mean to misrepresent the acronym there. I'm sorry. But at least they have the honesty to do that, you know, and they put that position forward. What is the Sinn Féin position? As I said last Congress, is to forage about, try and find a couple of excuses, as I say, devoid of credibility or reality, to vote against this. Because by God, that's what they want to do, is vote against it. And they'll take themselves there.
Thank you, Deputy.